Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. Have my Last Jedi t-shirt on, my Star Wars The Last Jedi movie right next to me, and judging by the frame around me, we are back, taking down Left Foot Media's video, The 6 Things That Fans of The Last Jedi Are Getting Wrong. This was the second video that I ever did on my channel, and I wanted to come back and kind of redo this video and talk about a lot of things that I didn't get to talk about the first time. When last we left off, Brandon was talking about there's parody humor, which I don't remember any parody humor in this film. And if there was, then they were probably doing some kind of an homage to Seth MacFarlane's Family Guy trilogy, okay, Blue Harvest, the something Dark Side, and It's a Trap, which they had done a couple years prior to this, to the new trilogy coming out, and so if they did put a couple of things of parody humor in there, but I don't remember any real like parody things happening in this film. So it just seems to me like Brandon really doesn't understand what Star Wars is. He said something like, well, this is supposed to be a serious Star Wars film. Like there wasn't any humor in the original 3 movies. There wasn't any humor in the prequel trilogy. He also then went on to say that, like, you have no story arc in this film. One of the things that's really, really hard to do, and this is true of anything, is the middle part of a 3-part trilogy, okay? It is extremely difficult to make the story continue from where you left off, get to a certain point, and then finish off with questions still to be answered, with some questions being answered, other questions still being left to be answered. And I think The Last Jedi does the same thing that both Episode 5 and Episode 2 really did well, which is it gives us enough of the story to continue pushing the story forward, but it doesn't give us so much. I mean, it's almost here again, it's almost like Brandon wanted this film to be both Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker kind of smushed into one. Because he kept saying in the last part, there's no like resolution to a lot of the questions that were asked, and that's why I brought up the whole setup, revelation, payoff. You can't have a trilogy without those 3 things, okay? Now, in a lot of films that are not multi-part, you know, they're standalone films, even though they might be part of larger things. Like, for instance, let's look at Die Hard for a minute, okay? Die Hard has your setup in the beginning, okay? It shows John McClane arriving. It shows, you know, like Bonnie Bedelia's character, Holly. It shows, you know, some of that stuff. It shows the villains coming in. The revelation is that the villains are there to go steal things. They're there to break into the vault. They're there to go do things. And then the payoff comes at the end when you find out that they were after that. The reason why they were basically blowing up the whole building and trying to do that stuff is because if they were going to steal that much money, then they needed to make it look like they had been destroyed in the process so that people wouldn't look too hard, okay? And then, of course, John McClane comes in, he shoots Alan Rickman, and then he falls out of the window, and bam, that's the payoff, okay? So you can get in 1 movie, or even 2 movies sometimes, you get the setup, the revelation, and the payoff all in one particular thing. But with other movies, you have to spend time building up the setup, the revelation, and the payoff, especially in a trilogy. And that's where something like Lord of the Rings comes in, okay? With Lord of the Rings, you have the setup of what the ring is, okay? How it needs to go to Mordor, how it needs to be destroyed, okay? The revelation comes in the Two Towers that the ring is corruptive, okay? It starts to corrupt the user. And that revelation comes in the form of Gollum, okay? And also you find out that, you know, that Saruman, who in the setup was kind of a villain, you find out that he is trying to take over Rohan, not just from without, by using the wild men and the Uruk-hai, but he's also trying to corrupt the mind of the king, King Theoden, okay? And then they have the big battle at Helm's Deep. And then the payoff comes in Return of the King, where they go to Gondor, and then there's the big final showdown with Gondor, and then you find out that, you know, the ring is starting to really corrupt Frodo, and so that kind of becomes the whole thing. Now, when you try to condense certain plot points and certain things, you end up with movies like Ralph Bakshi's version of Lord of the Rings. Because he originally intended to make this a two-part film series. Okay, he was going to make the first one, which was going to actually adapt sort of the first book and then about half of the Two Towers. And then it was going to, and then the second movie would have adapted the second half of Two Towers and then Return of the King. And so you would have had this duology, which would have told the entire story of the trilogy. Okay, and what ended up happening is that because Warner Brothers there was two companies that were producing some Lord of the Rings content / Hobbit content at the time. There was Ralph Bakshi, and then there was the Rankin Bass version. The Rankin Bass version, they had gotten a hold of The Hobbit, and they contacted the Tolkien estate and said, we want to do Return of the King. And Ralph Bakshi had already kind of, you know, tried to do the whole entire trilogy. So what ended up happening is that they told Rankin Bass, okay, you can have Return of the King. And then they told Bakshi, you can have Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers. And so what ended up happening is that Bakshi ended up changing the story just to be Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers. And then Rankin Bass ended up kind of bookending it with The Hobbit and then Return of the King. Which they basically ended up reusing a lot of the same assets. So, like, Frodo is the same as Bilbo. I think they just changed, like, a couple colors on some of his clothing. The character of Gollum is essentially the same. The Battle of the Five Armies, they literally reused the exact same footage in Return of the King for the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. And so it's They really just were kind of like, yay, we've got all these assets, let's just reuse them in this. Haha, joke's on you. So, that being said, I think that when you have a trilogy, you have to look at the trilogy. You can't look at each film in the trilogy and then say, well, this film does this, and then this film does this, and it's completely contrary to what film 1 does, and then film 3, well, that film 3 just doesn't even make any sense. You can't do that, okay? You have to look at them essentially as one whole film, okay? A good example of how to adapt a trilogy into a two-part duology is Dune. Denis Villeneuve's Dune. This film, if you saw my review of it on this channel, this film was phenomenal, okay? Because not only did they have some of the elements, conversations, thoughts, things like that the characters say and do, but you also had set design that paid homage to certain parts of the book as well. So it wasn't just, oh, hey, we're just going to take the film, hint, hint, and turn it into whatever the f we want. Thank you, David Lynch. And partly that's because the guy who wrote and directed this film and the executive producer of this miniseries are the executive producers on this film. And it shows. Because they spent a lot of time, you know, like carefully talking with Denis Villeneuve and saying, look, people have notions of what they want Dune to be and not to be. And so we want you to understand that the reason why the reception for this was much better than the 1984 version was because we did this as a trilogy. This was in 3 parts, okay? And they literally did, you know, he adapted each of the 3 parts. Now, he changed some of the scenes around to kind of fit his own narrative, but he didn't change the fundamentals of the book. Does that make sense? He didn't change the character of Paul. He didn't change the character of Jessica. He didn't change the character of Baron Harkonnen. He didn't change the character of Duke Leto. Okay? And I'm not saying that that's what happened with David Lynch's version of Dune, but David Lynch's version of Dune changed a lot because, like, they made Paul Atreides this, like, messianic figure who runs all over the place, you know, going with the Fremen, doing things, going, ha ha ha, look at me, I'm a messiah. That's not who Paul Atreides is in the book, folks. And so the whole point that I'm trying to bring up is that you have to look at the original story, and then you have to look at how did they adapt that over the 3 parts. And why I'm saying that this was one of the best adaptations in 2 parts is because Denis Villeneuve understands that if you're not going to make it in 3 parts, and you're going to do it in 3 parts, then you have to make the 3 parts make sense in 2 parts. Okay? And that's not what they were trying to accomplish in Star Wars. Okay? They were going for a trilogy. That was the plan all along. So it's not like they went... It's not like they were writing a duology and then Rian Johnson came in and just magically wrote some weird story that made them go, oh no, now we gotta do a 3rd part to finish it. It was always going to be a flippin' trilogy, you moron. So this is the point of this guy not understanding what is the difference between a duology and a trilogy. Okay? As in a Star Wars trilogy. Okay? Because it seems to me... Let me just drop these back up here. It seems to me like this guy doesn't have a clue when it comes to Star Wars films. He's so damn clueless. And he's not bringing up... He's mentioning all these things, but he's not bringing up anything specific. He's just saying, oh, there's parody humor. Oh, like there wasn't, you know, that type of humor in episode 2. Okay? Like, there was a whole bunch of flippin' dad jokes in episode 2. I just watched this film. Okay? Just this week, I watched that film. And there's a whole bunch of dad jokes, you moron. Have you not watched episode 2? Literally, C-3PO in the last battle in Geonosis, okay, like, you know, he comes out and he's like, excuse me, I can't get up. And then it's like, you know, R2 comes out. R2, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh, you're going to strain something. My neck! And then he's, now where are you taking me? This is such a drag. As his head is literally dragging behind behind R2-D2. Then when he pulls up next to him, he's like, oh, I'm quite beside myself. Duh. You know, I mean, it's like there's so much of that, okay? There's so much of that humor going on, okay? I mean, Star Wars can have humor and yet still be somewhat serious in its execution of things. Okay? And like, I don't know, I mean, I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what the hell he's talking about when he talks about parody humor in this film. Because I never saw any parody humor in this film. About the only thing that I could maybe construe as somewhat parody-ish was when Yoda shows up and scorches the original Jedi Temple. The tree that was the original kind of Jedi Temple with the sacred texts in it, and you know, and you know, Yoda's just kind of sitting there kind of laughing at Luke, and he's like, "Oh, young Skywalker, miss you, I have." Like, why? Like, that's not a parody thing, though. That's just Yoda being Yoda. Because he's trying to teach Luke a lesson like he did, okay, in both Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Okay? It's just this time he's doing it in such a way that... Because if you remember, when Luke first landed, what did Yoda do to test him? Yoda came in, started throwing things all over the place, started grabbing things, "Mine, or I'll help you not," you know, and doing all that stuff, okay? He was doing it to test how ready Luke Skywalker was to become a Jedi. Because I'm pretty sure Luke wasn't the only person that showed up on Dagobah at some point, okay? And so Yoda was testing him, saying, "Hey, you know, I want to see how ready this boy is to become a Jedi." And then what does he tell Yoda? Okay? When Yoda says, "Will he finish what he begins?" And he goes, "I won't fail you. I'm not afraid." And he's like, "You will be. You will be." That's only because he's trying to get him to understand that fear is a necessary part of a Jedi's trial. They have to overcome their fear, because that fear leads to anger, which leads to hate, which leads to suffering. Okay? That's the path to the dark side. And we actually see that progression in Anakin in episode 1 through 3. Okay? We see him kind of fearing to lose his mother. There was a deleted scene where Anakin actually gets into a fight with a young Greedo. Okay? And, you know, they kind of tussle. They kind of get into it. Okay? And Anakin is told by Qui-Gon that he has to master that. Okay? And the only trial that he didn't face was the mirror. Coming face to face with the dark side and understanding that the dark side only shows you. It only shows the reflection of yourself. Just the darker nature of that reflection. Okay? Hence, when Rey goes down into the dark side cave in The Last Jedi and says, you know, "Show me my parents." Okay? And then she sees the two silhouettes walking up, and then they merge together, and it becomes her. Because what did the dark side cave show Luke? It showed him in Vader's uniform. Because Luke could just as easily have become another Vader. That's the point. Okay? And the problem is, it's almost like this guy has never understood what a Star Wars film is, or how the lore works.
It feels kind of like the final film, even though it's badly executed.
No, it doesn't, actually. It feels like the second film in a 3-part trilogy. Because if it was the final film in the three-part trilogy, then we would have gotten something like... We would have gotten something else. Okay? Because that's what would have happened. This isn't the final film, dude. And if you're thinking that it's the final film, then you've missed that completely. You have no idea what the hell is going on.
It feels more like a badly executed final film in a trilogy, instead of what the second film in a trilogy should be, something that perhaps develops and takes things in new directions.
What new directions? So let's go back and let's look at episode 4. Okay? We had Luke Skywalker, farm boy on Tatooine. His uncle buys some droids. One of the droids runs away. He goes after him. His aunt and uncle get killed. He meets Obi-Wan. They go on a wacky, zany adventure to the Death Star. They rescue the princess. He blows up the first Death Star. Where's the logical progression from that? Oh, plus he meets a pilot and his Harry co-pilot. Where's the logical progression from that? What new directions did George Lucas take the trilogy in? He really didn't. Because he was following the path of the hero. Okay? There were no new directions to go in because you had to have... I mean, Luke Skywalker already knew because he was told by Ben that his father was a Jedi, that he had the Jedi powers. He already started training a tiny bit with Ben. So, what new direction was he going in? Lucas, after he killed off Ben Kenobi at the end of the first, towards the end of the first film, he thought, now I need a master that's more powerful than Ben. And he goes, so instead of making them incredibly tall, instead of making him, some like some Wookiee, okay, he decided to make him a little 3-foot Muppet. Okay, 2-foot Muppet. And he called Jim Henson and said, hey, can you give me, or can you come and help me with this? And he said, no, I can't. I'm busy, but I'll send you the next best guy I have. And case in point, he does the voice of Miss Piggy. George said, perfect. Frank Oz showed up on set. They showed him how they wanted to do it. He worked with the team to make the puppet so that he could articulate the mouth. Okay? And they built the stage so that he could sit below it and have, Yoda move around and talk. Okay? That's not a new direction. That's just a logical progression of the next evolution of the teaching of Luke Skywalker. If you follow the path of the hero. There really wasn't any new directions to go in. I mean, instead of having an incredibly hot planet, they had an incredibly cold planet. They had a city in the clouds. They didn't have a Death Star, they just had big Star Destroyers. I mean, there was nothing real big or bold that went in that. The only thing that was the revelation of Vader being his father and not just some Jedi who turned bad was kind of a shock to audiences then. Okay? But the point being that this guy seems to think that they needed to just go off in some radical new direction. What new direction were you expecting then, son? Because it doesn't seem to me like he understands that Star Wars doesn't need new directions. They went in plenty of new directions with the Legends EU timeline, and it sucked. Hard. So no, they didn't need new directions. What they needed was just to have it the way it was. which is what J.J. Abrams understood. The swashbuckling, the heroes, the people running around. And we got plenty of character development in this. Okay? I mean, we learn that Ben Solo is torn in half, and we see him constantly fighting against his light side and dark side natures. He has the moment where he's going, like he's flying towards the bridge of the Radis. And there's a moment where his hands are on the firing studs, and he senses his mother is on the bridge. And you see him struggle against wanting to pull, just press the studs, but he can't do it. And so his wingmen do. Okay? So, the point being that I don't know that this guy really understands any of the story that he watched. And I don't even know that he was watching The Last Jedi. Because it seems to me, watching this film again for the, umpteenth time, it seems to me like he doesn't really understand what Star Wars truly is. Okay? At its core, what it truly is. Okay? It's space opera. It is sci-fi. It's high sci-fi. Okay? It is not Star Trek Utopia. And it's not Dune religious fanaticism run amok in the galaxy. There is war. That's the point. Okay? I mean, it's literally in the title. Star Wars. Okay? You can't get much plainer than that. And one of the things that I think a lot of people fail to understand. In fact, let me grab... staring at this book for a while. But this is... let me grab... I think it's... if I remember correctly. Maybe it wasn't this one. I thought about it. Let me see here. This one talked about like what it is and what it isn't, but let me just see here. Look at well, I thought it was in this book, but I guess it's not. But basically, I mean, this was this was the Galactic Campaign Guide to the Star Wars RPG from WotC, and basically, the point that I was trying to get at is that they were basically saying, what is Star Wars? Star Wars... Actually, hang on. Hold that thought for 1 second. And we're back. So, I decided to grab my first edition Wizards of the Coast Star Wars RPG book. Okay, this came out in around about 2000. It was right after Episode 1, as you can see. Like, it's got all the different characters from Episode 1, and then on the back it's got all the characters from the original trilogy. Because Episode 1 was brand spanking new, and West End Games had lost the license to produce Star Wars content to Wizards of the Coast. This game came out, and I remember playing it with some friends back in the day. So, what is space fantasy? First, you have to realize that Star Wars isn't hard science fiction. Those who write the movies and novels don't worry too much about scientific accuracy, and neither should you. Anything is possible as long as it makes for a good story, and the special effects look cool. Star Wars isn't super science either. Characters and story are more important to a Star Wars adventure than the newest gizmo, though cool equipment does have its place. But technology never overshadows the human element. So although characters might routinely have to buy and repair equipment, they don't usually have to invent new gadgets to save the day and defeat enemies of the Republic or the Empire. Whatever they need probably already exists in the universe. Here are some tips to help the GM incorporate key elements of space fantasy into an adventure. Plenty of action. In a space fantasy story, there's a lot of action, including combat, chases, and dramatic conflict. Events happen fast and furiously. They usually involve a lot more reaction than planning. So the game master should never let the heroes stand around quietly for too long. That's not in the spirit of space fantasy. Opportunities for combat. Every adventure should have at least one combat scene, plus the potential for several more. Combat is action, and it's usually more exciting for the characters to blast their way out of trouble than to talk an enemy into surrendering, although the latter can be fun as a change of pace. So be prepared. Every scene you present may erupt into combat, and that's okay. After all, that's space fantasy. That's Star Wars. Cool villains. In most cases, the heroes are the good guys and the villains are exceptionally evil, but they're also cool. Nothing makes an adventure more memorable than a nasty, evil, powerful, and ultimately cool villain who threatens the heroes and opposes them at every turn. Of course, not every villain in the character's face has to be super cool. Minor opponents and lackeys of major villains are often weak, cowardly, and even outright stupid. They may still be dangerous in large numbers. Even weak opponents can seriously threaten a group of heroes. Epic plots. In space fantasy, everything is bigger, better, and larger than life. Overwhelming odds, galaxy-wide conspiracies, and unthinkably large armies, planet-destroying superweapons, masters of ultimate evil. These elements are present on a grand scale in every Star Wars adventure. Heroes rescue planets from total destruction, cross light years of distance in a heartbeat, and battle weapons the size of small moons as they struggle to save the galaxy. Clear-cut motives. In most cases, space fantasy presents the epic conflict of good versus evil. The good guys clearly have the best interests of the galaxy at heart, while the bad guys simply want to conquer or destroy it. There's room for the occasional shade of gray, but in general, you know that Darth Maul and Darth Sidious are evil, and that Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi are good. So when the heroes encounter a band of pirates, they know they're facing vile thugs who like to hurt people and accumulate wealth, usually by hurting people. And when they encounter battle droids, they'll know there's no use trying to talk sense into them. They'll just have to blast or be blasted. That is Star Wars in a nutshell, okay? And the point of that is that space fantasy is not meant to be high art. It's not meant to be some super serious, this is not Warhammer 40k, okay? Where you have, you know, heresies and god emperors and all of this kind of stuff. It's not that. Okay? And if that's what you're expecting, go follow Henry Cavill. He's got some stuff for you. My point is that space fantasy is meant to be just that. Space fantasy. Okay? The heroes are good, the villains are evil, and occasionally there's shades of gray in between. Okay? There's no such thing as gray Jedi. There's no such thing as, you know, all this other stuff that people like to come up with. Hell, I came up with the idea for Grey Jedi way before Grey Jedi even existed. I called them Meridian Jedis, where they tried to walk the line between good and evil. Okay? But you can't make it work when the line that delineates it is so clear-cut, there's no towing the line. Okay? I think probably the closest anyone ever came to being a, quote, gray Jedi, unquote, was Mace Windu. Because he studied a lot of Sith techniques because he knew that someday the Sith were likely to return. Even though he didn't truly believe it, okay? Because he says, you know, I don't know that the Sith would have returned without us knowing. But even Yoda's like, hard to see the dark side is, if you remember the movie. That's episode 1. So that's the point, folks, okay? So let's jump back in and let's see what else we can do here.
And then leaves you with a cliffhanger waiting for and wondering what's going to happen next. There's none of that you could say is true about The Last Jedi. It just doesn't leave you wondering what's going to happen next.
Yeah, it does. Okay? Because at the end, Luke Skywalker died. And Rey's sitting with Leia, and they're kind of like, we don't know what to do next. I don't know, how do we rebuild the resistance from this? And Leia says, we have everything we need. Okay? How is that any different than the way that, say, episode 5 ends? Which is basically, you know, Lando and Chewie are getting ready to blast off and head to Tatooine, and Luke and Leia are standing on the medical frigate, kind of looking at the galaxy and thinking, what next? You don't have to have a cliffhanger. That's not a cliffhanger, okay? That's Luke learned a terrible truth, and now he has to deal with that terrible truth. In fact, that's what makes the book Shadows of the Empire so good. And if you haven't read it, I would recommend reading it. Shadows of the Empire, Steve Perry did such a great job in kind of creating this, like, thing inside Luke Skywalker's head where he's like, I am not sure. Like, he's fighting against the terrible truth the whole book. He doesn't want to admit that Vader is his father. Okay? And Prince Shizor finds out because he's there when Palpatine makes contact with Vader at the end and says the son of Skywalker must not become a Jedi, and he's like, And so he puts a plan in motion to try to eliminate Luke and make it look like Vader's fault, because he wants to become the new right-hand man to the Emperor, okay? And eventually maybe even overthrow Palpatine and become the new Emperor, okay? That's his ultimate goal. But his immediate goal is track Luke Skywalker down, find him, kill him, and make Vader pay for it, okay? Because it was a revenge thing. But all during the book, Luke keeps fighting with his brush with the dark side, with his fight with Vader, his new hand, building a new lightsaber, doing all that stuff. It is perfect in its execution of how it tells the story perfectly between the events of Episode 5 and Episode 6. Okay? And that is an example of doing the story right. Okay? And I would say that in this case, they did the story right as the middle story, because Rey has a brush with the Force, and so she starts to come to grips with it. And when she gets to Acto, she's kind of like, I just need someone to show me my place in all this. Because she's not sure where she fits in. That's her whole character arc, is how does she fit in? And so she tries to go to Acto. She tries to get Luke to understand her situation. He doesn't want to understand, so she leaves to go to Ben because she thinks that maybe Ben can help her, because when they touched, because of their connection, when she touched his hand, she saw that, like, he would not turn to the dark side, that he would turn away from the dark side. Now, he saw the opposite. He saw her falling to the dark side. But they end up exactly like opposite of what they thought was going to happen through the Force. Okay? Because the Force just shows you one possible future. But that future doesn't necessarily have to go down in that same road. Now, what's interesting is I saw today on Facebook, because I'm part of a number of Star Wars fan groups on Facebook, and one of the fan groups on Facebook, somebody posted up a thing that had, from Episode 2, it had Shmi Skywalker saying to Anakin, "I love you," trying to say "I love you" because she's dying. Or I think she says "I love you." And then in Episode 3, it shows both Padme and Obi-Wan. Padme's like, come back, I love you. And then Obi-Wan, after he cuts his legs off, is like, you were my brother, Anakin, I loved you. And he goes, it's so amazing to me that Anakin had the 3 people in his life that absolutely loved him. And granted, his mom died. But him pursuing the dark side actually caused him to go blind to the fact that the people that he loved still loved him, even though he was going down that dark path. And if he'd stopped and taken a minute to really understand, he probably wouldn't have gone that way. And I was thinking about it, I was like, yeah. And I was like, the funny thing was, I remember sitting in the theater in Episode 3, knowing he was going to become Vader, but we're watching the scene in the temple where he's in the temple, and he's staring across the Gulf of Coruscant, and Padme's in their apartment, and she's staring across the Gulf of Coruscant. So he's in the temple, she's in 500 Republica. They're looking at each other across the Gulf of Coruscant. And I remember, sitting there going, don't do it, dude. Don't do it. It's not going to be worth it, man. It's not going to be worth it. Don't do it, man. And then it's like, when he turned away, I was like, oh, man. And it's still one of my favorite scenes, because I just love that, single tear that runs down his cheek as he sort of is because he hears Palpatine's voice, and then that single tear runs down his cheek. And he sort of steels himself and turns around and strides out of the room. And then you see Padme, and it's almost like she knows that something really bad is about to go down. She doesn't know what, but it's like she just instinctively knows that Anakin has gone to do something really, really bad. And oh my God, is that scene powerful. That is probably probably the best scene out of all 9 films, and I'm not joking about this, out of all 9 films, that's probably my favorite scene, because of how it portrays that, why he did it. Because without that scene, it would have just been, oh, he went and fell to the dark side because Padme or something. No. You have to understand that he did it because he thought he was going to lose her. And Palpatine's voice comes into his head, and we're not sure if that voice was from Palpatine at that moment, sitting in his Senate office, going, literally making a connection with Anakin's mind and going, if the Jedi kill me, any hope of saving her dies. Or if he's just hearing that because that's just the Force maybe, tricking him into thinking that that's the only way to save Padme. We don't know. Okay, even the novelization is very unclear on that. It just says he hears Palpatine's voice in his head. So we're not sure if that's actually Palpatine talking to him, or if that's just, maybe just his mind, just using Palpatine's voice as sort of a mentor, if the Jedi kill me, any hope of saving her dies, something like that. But I would almost lean towards that's literally that's literally Palpatine trying to push Anakin over the edge. let's do a little bit more, and then we will call it good.
Or you have one of the most absurd moments ever seen, and this is in a series of films that includes Jar Jar Binks and Anakin Skywalker talking about sand. And that absurd sequence, no, it's not when Luke is drinking breast milk out of that sea cow thing. That was bad enough. I'm talking about Princess Leia, a well-established character in this universe who all of a sudden, for no reason and with no explanation given, is now using force powers in the extreme that we've never ever seen her use before. And not only that, but we've never seen anyone use these force powers before. Even in the prequels, remember when at the start of The Phantom Menace, when the bad guys try and poison the two Jedis, what do they have to do? They have to put on rebreathers, or they have to put on masks.
No, they didn't. And that proves to me that you've never actually seen a Star Wars film. No, they literally just hold their fucking breath, you moron. Oh my fucking god. Is Leia a daughter of Skywalker or not? Seriously, I brought this up in the original one because I was like, are you flippin' serious, dude? Is she a fucking daughter of Skywalker or not? If she's a daughter, because, I mean, like, literally, Yoda tells Luke, pass on what you have learned. There is another Skywalker, and then he dies. And then he walks out, and Obi-Wan comes up, and he goes, Yoda spoke of another. The other he spoke of was your twin sister. But I have no sister. To protect you, you know, the Emperor knew, as I did, that if Anakin were to have any offspring, he would have been a threat to him. That's why your sister remains safely anonymous. Leia! Leia's my sister! Oh, son of a bitch! So, is she a daughter of Skywalker or not? Because again, this is where the idiocy of the people who have never actually understood the stupidity of how they did the Legends EU timeline, okay? Where Leia never got properly trained as a Jedi, okay? And the fact that, oh, we've never seen these kinds of things, blah, blah, blah. There are powers, force powers, that you can use in Star Wars Saga Edition, in some of the West End games Star Wars, if you end up becoming trained as a Jedi, because it's mostly during the Rebellion era and post-Rebellion era. The problem comes in when people like this don't understand that the Force is Deus Ex Machina. Literally, it means that whoever's going to do whatever, that's going to end up causing... The writers can basically make the Force do whatever the fuck they want, okay? It's kind of like James Bond and his gadgets, okay? The gadgets were always a Deus Ex Machina, okay? The writers would be sitting there, you know, James Bond is in the situation where he's got, you know, he's going to be in handcuffs later. So we'll give him a keychain that has stun gas and a lockpick, okay? And so, like, and oh, and we'll also give it, like, we'll pack it with a little tiny charge of C4 so they can blow over a statue. Deus Ex Machina. He ends up using every single part of that keychain in this film. Okay? So, the Force is similar to that, where it can do whatever people want it to do, okay? And so, he talks about the story not going in new directions, but then he complains when it goes in a new direction in that Leia was properly trained as a Jedi because she's the daughter of fucking Skywalker, and that she uses the Force to save herself from space. All of a sudden, that's a problem? How is that a fucking problem? Because again, if she's the fucking daughter of Skywalker, then fucking deal with it! If she's not the daughter of Skywalker, well then we have a problem. So which is it, man? Is she the daughter of Skywalker or not? Because it seems like this guy doesn't understand what Star Wars is. And he's never seen episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, or 7, or 8, or 9, or Rogue One, or Solo, or anything since. Because I have proven unequivocally, and I'm not sitting here using movie clips, I'm just talking about the movie. You can go check me. Okay? Because Star Wars is just my thing. I fixate on it, okay? And I love it to death. That's one of the reasons why I'm defending it so vigorously from people like this idiot who don't really understand what is going on. Star Wars is space fantasy. It doesn't have to make 100% logical sense at all times. And the Force, being the deus ex machina of the universe, can do whatever the writers want it to fucking do. And you don't have a prayer, son. You can't say, well, the Force can't do that. Well, how do you know? Have you read every single Legends EU canon book? Have you memorized every single Force power from every single version of the RPG? Because there were some things in these two games that you probably were like, what the fuck? That the Force did. Especially this one. Talking about this guy right here. He's not even real. You find that out later on. He's literally a spirit who feeds on, like, living beings. Okay? Darth Sion, the guy who's literally, like, every single bone in his body is broken and he's literally walking around in constant pain. And the only thing holding him together is the Force. Okay? I mean, honestly, this... If you haven't ever played these, then you don't know what the Force is capable of, you absolute freaking moron. Because there are things that happen in just these two games that throw everything else in Star Wars into question. Okay? Because nothing from either of those two games has anything to do with reality when it comes to what we saw in the original 3 films or the prequels. Nothing. There was never any battle meditation, which was something that came out afterwards. Hint, the Thrawn trilogy. You know, Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, The Last Command, the one that gave us Mara Jade, you absolute idiot. It's only the most well-known 3 books in Star Wars. Okay? And if you haven't read those, you're a moron. The point being that they got the concept for Bastila's battle meditation in this game from that particular trilogy. Because they were trying to say that, like, when the Emperor died, okay, you know, the whole battle of Endor, above Endor, went shit. And Thrawn was basically telling Captain Peleon, you know, why do you think that is? Oh, because Emperor Palpatine died. Oh. I'll give you a hint. The battle went to shit long before Palpatine died. Okay? It did. Because, you know, but that's besides the point. But that's where they got the battle meditation from, was from that book. Okay? But that's what I'm saying. There are a lot of things that happen that are not in the original 6 films. Okay? Or maybe are implied to have happened at some point. But no, they didn't use rebreathers. The only time that they used the breathing mechanisms was when they were on Naboo. They'd met Jar Jar. Jar Jar took them down to the waterfront to go to Otogunga. Okay? And they pull out their little breathers, they put them on, and then they go into the water. That was the only time they pulled out those Aquata breathers. Okay? They did not do that in the room. They just held their breath. Okay? And they could likely use the Force to kind of create a little bubble around them to be able to go out and, you know, do what they need to do. Because when they walk out, they're breathing just perfectly fine. Okay? So it's likely that they held their breath for a second until they could use the Force to kind of push the gas away from them long enough to be able to walk out the door. So, if they could do it, why can't Leia? Because again, it's implied. Because at one second they're holding their breath, but the next second when they walk out of the fucking room, they're breathing normally. Which means they had to be using the Force to push the gas away from themselves. So they just breathed so that they could concentrate enough, so that they held their breath long enough to be able to, you know, use the Force to push the gas away from themselves, and then they walked out and started hacking the droids up. So, I'm sorry, Brandon, you're an absolute moron. You are. You have no idea what is in even Star Wars. Okay? So smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you think of this series so far, and as we say, we will see you on the next one.